You're sitting in my seat. I don't know how you got that ticket, but I need you to move right now." The words cut through the quiet hum of United Flight 1425's first-class cabin like a blade through silk. Stephanie Caldwell stood in the narrow aisle, her manicured fingers gripping a boarding pass so tightly the paper was beginning to crumple. Her voice carried that particular tone of authority that wealthy white women had perfected over generations, sharp enough to command attention, sweet enough to maintain plausible deniability. At 7:45 a.m. on a crisp Denver morning, the Boeing 737 was nearly finished boarding. Most passengers had already settled into their seats, stowing carry-ons and preparing for the 3-hour flight to Washington, D.C. The first-class cabin with its spacious leather seats and muted lighting typically embodied an oasis of calm before takeoff. But not today. The man in seat 2A looked up from his tablet, startled. Damon Pierce, 41 years old, had been quietly reviewing presentation materials when the interruption came. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a gray sweater, and black sneakers, the kind of outfit that said successful, but not flashy. His 6'1" frame was relaxed in the window seat, and his dark eyes held a patient expression that suggested he'd encountered this particular scenario before. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Damon said, his voice calm and polite. "But I believe there might be some confusion. My boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A. He held up his phone, displaying his mobile boarding pass with the seat assignment clearly visible. Stephanie Caldwell, 49, was not having it. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her Hermes scarf arranged just so around the collar of her cream-colored blazer. Everything about her screamed old money and newer desperation. She'd been running late, not because of traffic, but because she'd spent 20 minutes at the gate arguing about her oversized Louis Vuitton carry-on. As usual, she'd won through sheer persistence and volume. "There's obviously been a computer error," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I've been flying this route for 12 years. I always sit in 2A. I have medical issues that require the window seat." She gestured vaguely at her chest. "Claustrophobia. It's a documented condition." Damon glanced at his boarding pass again, then at her ticket, which she was now waving in his direction. Even from his seated position, he could see it clearly read 2B. He'd learned long ago not to point out such obvious contradictions immediately. Experience had taught him that sometimes grace and patience could diffuse these situations before they escalated. "I understand how frustrating travel mix-ups can be," he said, his tone remaining steady. Perhaps we could ask the flight attendant to help clarify the seating arrangement. But Stephanie wasn't interested in clarification. She was interested in getting her way as she had in every other aspect of her privileged life. The recent divorce had stripped away many of her certainties. The house in Aspen, the standing reservation at the best restaurants, the automatic deference that came with being Mrs. Harold Caldwell III. But airplane seats, those she could still control. "I don't need a flight attendant," she snapped. "I need you to move. Now. This isn't some budget airline where people just sit wherever they want." Other passengers were beginning to notice. A young couple in row 1 paused their quiet conversation. An elderly man across the aisle looked up from his Wall Street Journal. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from peaceful anticipation to uncomfortable tension. Carlos Rivera, a 31-year-old flight attendant with kind eyes and 8 years of experience dealing with difficult passengers, approached from the galley. His uniform was crisp, his smile professional but genuine. He'd been watching the interaction from the corner of his eye while completing pre-flight preparations. "Good morning," he said, addressing both passengers. "Is there something I can help you with?" Stephanie turned to him like a drowning woman spotting a life preserver. "Yes, there is. This gentleman is sitting in my seat. I've been a platinum member for over a decade, and I always sit in 2A. I have a medical condition that requires the window seat." Carlos glanced at Damon, who remained seated but alert. He'd seen this dance before: the claims of medical necessity, the appeals to frequent flyer status, the barely concealed implications about who belonged where. He pulled out his tablet to check the passenger manifest. "Let me take a look at the seating assignments," Carlos said diplomatically. His fingers moved across the screen. "Mr. Pierce, you're booked in 2A, correct?" "That's what my boarding pass shows," Damon replied, his voice still calm but with a slight edge that suggested his patience wasn't infinite. "And Ms. Caldwell," Carlos continued. "I show you in seat 2B, which is the aisle seat right next to Mr. Pierce. Both are first-class seats with the same level of service." Stephanie's face flushed pink. "That's impossible. I specifically requested 2A when I booked this flight. I told the agent about my medical condition. Check your system again." Carlos did check again, his brow furrowing slightly. "Ma'am, I show that 2B was assigned when you booked, and 2A was already occupied by Mr. Pierce, who booked his ticket 3 weeks ago." The flush deepened to red. 3 weeks. Stephanie's voice cracked slightly. "Well, that doesn't matter. Frequent flyer status should override everything else. Do you know how much money I've spent with this airline?" Damon watched the exchange with growing concern. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on them, could sense the discomfort rippling through the cabin. He'd faced discrimination before, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, but rarely this publicly, and never when he was simply trying to sit in the seat he'd paid for. "Ma'am," Carlos said, his voice still patient but firmer now, "both seats are first class, and both passengers have valid tickets. If there's a medical issue, I'd be happy to speak with the captain about possible accommodations, but I can't ask a passenger to move from their assigned seat without cause." Without cause? Stephanie's voice rose to near shriek level. "I just told you the cause, medical necessity, and frequent flyer priority. What kind of airline is this?" The elderly man with the Wall Street Journal folded his paper and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but perhaps we could all just settle into our assigned seats. The flight is supposed to depart in 15 minutes. Stephanie whirled around to face him. "This doesn't concern you, sir. This is between me and the airline staff." "Actually," said a voice from row 1, "it concerns all of us when someone is causing a scene." The speaker was a woman in her late 20s with dark hair and intelligent eyes. Luna Martinez had been watching the entire interaction with growing disbelief. Stephanie's mouth dropped open. "Causing a scene, I'm advocating for proper customer service. This man," she gestured dramatically at Damon, "is sitting in a seat that should have been mine. It's obvious there's been some kind of mistake." "The mistake," Luna said quietly, "seems to be in your understanding of how airline seating works." The tension in the cabin ratcheted up another notch. Damon could see this was spiraling in a direction that would only get worse. He'd learned from years of experience in corporate boardrooms and hostile negotiations that sometimes the gracious move was also the strategic one. "You know what he said, starting to unbuckle his seatbelt? If it's really that important to Ms. Caldwell, I don't mind switching to 2B. "No." Carlos held up a hand. "Sir, you don't need to do that. You have every right to your assigned seat." But Stephanie was already moving toward the window seat. "Thank you," she said, not to Damon, but to Carlos, as if the flight attendant had somehow resolved the issue. "I knew this could be worked out reasonably." Damon stood up to let her pass, gathering his tablet and the small briefcase he'd placed under the seat. As he moved to sit in 2B, he caught Luna's eye. She was shaking her head in disgust, and he saw her discreetly pull out her phone. "This is unbelievable," Luna muttered to her seatmate loud enough for others to hear. Complete and utter unbelievable. Stephanie settled into 2A with a satisfied sigh, pulling out her own tablet as if nothing unusual had happened. She was already thinking about her meeting in Washington, the potential business partnership that could save her flailing real estate company. She'd won this round as she always did. It never occurred to her to wonder why the man in the gray sweater had given up his seat so easily, or why the flight attendant looked so uncomfortable. As Damon settled into 2B, he felt the familiar sting of injustice mixed with practiced resignation. But something else stirred in his chest, a quiet recognition that this moment might be remembered longer than either he or Stephanie Caldwell could possibly imagine. The flight was supposed to push back from the gate in 10 minutes. Instead, it would be remembered as the day that prejudice and entitlement collided at 35,000 feet, with consequences that would ripple far beyond the confines of a single airplane cabin. Stephanie had barely settled into her claimed window seat when the vultures began to circle. As if drawn by some invisible signal, the passengers who had witnessed her victory started to weigh in with their support, emboldening her further and creating a feedback loop of entitlement that would soon spiral out of control. "Well done," came a voice from row 3. Brenda Morrison, 54, leaned forward with an approving nod. She was a carbon copy of Stephanie. Same generation, same social class, same unshakable belief that the world owed them deference. Brenda and Stephanie had known each other for 8 years through their country club's tennis league, though their friendship was more about mutual social climbing than genuine affection. Some people, Brenda continued her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, buy premium seats they can't actually afford and then cause problems when real frequent flyers need their proper accommodations. It happens all the time these days. Damon, now settling into seat 2B, felt the familiar burn of coded language. He'd heard variations of some people his entire life in college lecture halls, corporate boardrooms, and apparently airplane cabins. He kept his expression neutral, but Luna Martinez, now in row 1, was having none of it. "Excuse me, Luna," said, turning around to face Brenda. That man had the correct seat assignment. He was being polite by switching, not admitting to some kind of mistake. Kevin Anderson, a 42-year-old corporate lawyer in seat 1C, looked up from his iPhone with the expression of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. His 3-piece suit was impeccably tailored, his Harvard law ring catching the cabin light as he gestured dismissively. Actually, Kevin said, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who had never been wrong about anything in his life, airline seating protocols are more complex than most people understand. Frequent flyer status, medical accommodations, and fare class hierarchies all factor into seat assignments. I've seen this before. Fraudulent bookings are becoming increasingly common. The word fraudulent hung in the air like a slap. Damon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd been called many things in his 41 years, but never a fraud. Not when he'd built a $9 billion company from nothing. Not when he employed 22,000 people worldwide. Not when he was flying to Washington to potentially secure the largest defense contract in his company's history. Carlos Rivera, still standing in the aisle, felt the situation deteriorating rapidly. 8 years of flight attendant experience had taught him to recognize when passenger conflicts were moving from annoying to dangerous. He needed to defuse this before it required intervention from the captain or, worse, airport security. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos said, raising his voice slightly, "we need to complete our pre-flight preparations. Everyone is in a seat. Everyone has a valid ticket, and we're ready to move forward." But Stephanie wasn't ready to move forward. The validation from Brenda and Kevin had convinced her that she was not only right, but righteously indignant. Her voice took on the tone of someone who had found her cause. "I want to speak to someone in charge," she announced. "This entire situation has been handled improperly. I shouldn't have had to argue for my seat assignment in the first place." Ma'am, Carlos replied, "I am in charge of the cabin. The captain is preparing for departure." "No." Stephanie cut him off. "I mean someone from the airline. A supervisor. Someone with actual authority to fix this mess." Carlos exchanged a look with his colleague Maria Gonzalez, the chief flight attendant who had emerged from the galley upon hearing raised voices. Maria, 44, had 17 years of experience and the kind of calm authority that came from dealing with every conceivable passenger situation. She approached with a diplomatic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Maria, the lead flight attendant. I understand there's been some confusion about seating. Stephanie seized the opportunity like a drowning woman grabbing a rope. Finally, someone who might actually understand customer service. I've been a platinum member of this airline for 12 years. I have documented medical issues that require a window seat. When I arrived, I found this gentleman in my assigned seat. She gestured toward Damon as if he were an inanimate object rather than a human being sitting 3 feet away. Your colleague. She nodded toward Carlos, seemed unable to understand the priority that should be given to loyal customers with medical needs. Maria looked at her tablet, scrolling through the passenger manifest. Ms. Caldwell, I see you're booked in 2B and Mr. Pierce is in 2A. Both are first-class seats with identical service levels. That's not the point. Stephanie's voice was rising again. The point is that I specifically requested 2A when I made this reservation. I have claustrophobia that makes aisle seats impossible for me. This booking error has caused me significant distress. Kevin Anderson nodded sagely. The airline industry has really declined in terms of customer service standards. When you're paying premium prices, you should get premium treatment. Exactly, Brenda chimed in from row 3. Stephanie has been flying this route for years. She shouldn't have to justify her seat preference to anyone. Luna Martinez felt her blood pressure rising. She was a nurse at Denver General Hospital used to high-stress situations and life-or-death decisions. But watching this display of privileged entitlement made her angrier than any medical emergency. Are you people listening to yourselves? Luna said, her voice controlled but clearly furious. That man has been nothing but polite and accommodating. He even offered to switch seats to avoid conflict. But somehow he's the problem here. Diego Morales, a 21-year-old college student in row 4, had been watching the entire scene unfold with growing disbelief. As a communications major at the University of Colorado, he'd studied social dynamics and power structures. What he was witnessing was a textbook example of how biases played out in real-time interactions. Diego quietly opened his Instagram live feed and began streaming. Okay, guys, you're not going to believe what's happening on this flight right now, he whispered into his phone. We've got some next-level Karen behavior happening in first class, and I'm documenting everything. Miguel Torres, the 27-year-old gate agent, appeared at the aircraft door in response to Carlos's call. He was breathing slightly hard from running down the jet bridge and looked harried. Flight 1425 was already 7 minutes behind schedule, and delays had a cascade effect throughout the day. What's the situation? Miguel asked Maria in Spanish. Maria responded in kind, briefly explaining the seating dispute. Miguel nodded and approached Stephanie with the practiced smile of someone used to dealing with difficult customers. Ms. Caldwell, I'm Miguel from the gate. I understand you have concerns about your seat assignment. Finally, Stephanie exhaled. Yes, I've been trying to explain to your staff that there's been an error in my booking. I need to be in the window seat for medical reasons. But when I arrived, I found someone else sitting there. Miguel pulled out his handheld device and scrolled through the booking details. Ma'am, I show that you purchased seat 2B on this flight. Seat 2A was already assigned when you made your reservation. That's impossible. Stephanie's voice cracked with frustration. I always book 2A. Always. There must be some kind of computer glitch. I can see your booking history, Miguel said patiently. You typically do book 2A on this route, but this particular flight had 2A occupied when you made your reservation 3 days ago. Our system would have shown 2B as the best available first-class option. Damon listened to this exchange with growing amazement. 3 days ago, he'd booked his seat 3 weeks ago. The lies were getting more elaborate by the minute. Check the system again, Kevin Anderson interjected. There are protocols for medical accommodations and frequent flyer priorities that might not be reflected in the standard booking display. Miguel looked uncomfortable. He was being asked to second-guess a computer system that he knew was accurate by passengers who clearly outranked him in the airline's hierarchy of customer importance. Let me call my supervisor, he said. Please do, Stephanie said triumphantly. I think once someone with proper authority reviews this situation, we'll get it resolved correctly. Jessica Williams, the 38-year-old operations supervisor, arrived 8 minutes later. She was a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and the tired expression of someone who dealt with passenger complaints all day. Her first glance took in the scene: a cabin full of tense passengers, 2 flight attendants looking stressed, and a gate agent who appeared ready to quit his job. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already regretted asking. Stephanie launched into her explanation for the 4th time, each telling more embellished than the last. By now, her claustrophobia had become severe medical anxiety. Her frequent flyer status had gained an additional 2 years, and Damon's presence in her seat had become a clear booking error that needs immediate correction. Jessica listened politely, then checked her own tablet. The booking records were clear. Damon Pierce had reserved 2A 3 weeks ago. Stephanie Caldwell had booked 2B 3 days ago. There was no error, no medical accommodation request on file, and no protocol that would justify moving a passenger from their assigned seat. But Jessica also knew that Stephanie Caldwell was exactly the kind of customer who would escalate complaints to corporate headquarters, flood social media with negative reviews, and generally make everyone's life miserable until she got her way. Sometimes the path of least resistance was also the path of injustice. "Mr. Pierce," Jessica said, addressing Damon directly for the first time, "would you be willing to consider relocating to seat 2B to help resolve this situation? Both seats offer identical service, and we'd be happy to provide compensation for any inconvenience." The suggestion hung in the air like a moral test. Damon looked around the cabin at the faces watching him. Luna Martinez was shaking her head vigorously. Diego was still live-streaming, his viewer count growing by the minute. Carlos and Maria looked ashamed but helpless. "I'm already in 2B," Damon said quietly. "I moved to avoid further conflict." "Oh." Jessica blinked, realizing she'd missed that detail. "Well then, the issue is resolved, isn't it?" "The issue," Luna said loudly, "is that a passenger was forced to give up his assigned seat because someone else threw a tantrum. That's not resolution. That's rewarding bad behavior." "I did not throw a tantrum," Stephanie snapped. "I advocated for proper customer service and medical accommodation. By lying about your ticket and accusing an innocent man of fraud," Luna shot back. The cabin erupted in murmurs of agreement and disagreement. Passengers were now firmly divided into camps, and the atmosphere was toxic. Jessica realized she'd walked into a situation that was spiraling far beyond a simple seating dispute. But before she could formulate a response, fate intervened in the form of a loud electrical crack from somewhere near row 2. Sparks flew from the panel beneath seat 2A, followed immediately by the acrid smell of burning electronics. Emergency lighting flickered on, and an automated voice announced, "Attention crew, avionics malfunction detected. Maintenance required before departure." The seating argument suddenly became the least of everyone's problems. As chaos erupted in the cabin, with sparks flying from the electrical panel, Damon Pierce found himself in a familiar position, remaining calm, while others panicked. 23 years of building Pierce Aviation Technologies from a garage startup to a $9 billion defense contractor had taught him that the most critical moments required the coolest heads. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was flying to finalize the largest contract in his company's history, a $15 billion Pentagon deal that would revolutionize military aviation technology and secure jobs for over 12,000 employees. The meeting, scheduled for 2 p.m. today in Washington, would culminate 18 months of negotiations, technical demonstrations, and security clearances. Every detail had been planned with military precision, except for the detail of getting there without incident. "Everyone remain calm," Maria Gonzalez announced over the cabin intercom as smoke detectors began chirping. "We're experiencing a minor electrical issue that our maintenance team will address shortly. For safety reasons, we need everyone to remain in their seats with seat belts fastened." Stephanie Caldwell, now sitting in the window seat she'd fought so hard to claim, stared in horror at the sparking panel directly beneath her feet. The acrid smell of burning electronics filled her nostrils, and for the first time since boarding, she was speechless. "Is the plane going to catch fire?" she whispered to no one in particular. Damon, despite being the person she'd just publicly humiliated, leaned over from 2B. "Aircraft electrical systems have multiple redundancies," he said calmly. "This appears to be isolated to a non-critical panel. The maintenance team will isolate the circuit and inspect for damage." Stephanie stared at him. "How do you know that?" Before he could answer, Carlos Rivera was on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight attendant, Carlos. We've contacted our maintenance team, who will be boarding momentarily to assess the situation. As a precautionary measure, we're going to have everyone deplane while they complete their inspection." The cabin erupted in groans and complaints. Diego Morales, still live streaming from row 4, turned his phone camera to capture the reaction. His follower count had jumped to over 15,000 viewers, all watching what had started as a seating dispute and was now becoming a much larger story. "This is unreal," Diego whispered into his camera. "We went from watching someone steal a seat to the plane literally sparking. I can't make this stuff up." As passengers began gathering their belongings, fragments of conversation revealed the stakes each person carried. Robert Johnson, the elderly man with the Wall Street Journal, was traveling to his granddaughter's college graduation. The young couple in row 1 was heading to their wedding rehearsal in Washington. Luna Martinez was flying to a nursing conference where she was presenting research on emergency medical procedures. And Stephanie Caldwell, as she fumbled with her oversized carry-on, accidentally revealed her own desperation to Brenda Morrison. "I can't miss this meeting," she whispered urgently. "Patricia Vanderbilt is considering investing in my company, but she's also meeting with 2 other real estate firms. If I'm not there to present—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Her recently divorced status had left her fighting to maintain a business that was hemorrhaging clients and credibility. Damon overheard this as he waited patiently for the aisle to clear. Despite everything that had just happened, he felt a flicker of sympathy. He understood the pressure of make-or-break meetings, the weight of other people's jobs and livelihoods riding on a single presentation. But his sympathy evaporated when he heard her next comment to Brenda. "This is probably his fault somehow," Stephanie muttered, nodding toward Damon. "The timing is too convenient. First he causes drama about the seating. Now there's a mechanical problem right where he was supposed to be sitting." Brenda's eyes widened with the possibility. "You think he sabotaged something? I wouldn't put it past him," Stephanie said, her voice growing more confident in her conspiracy theory. "People like that, they get angry when they don't get their way. Maybe he did something to the electronics when he was sitting there." Luna Martinez, gathering her medical bag from the overhead compartment, spun around in disbelief. "Are you seriously suggesting that man sabotaged an airplane because you stole his seat? Do you listen to yourself?" "I didn't steal anything," Stephanie shot back. "And I'm just saying the timing is suspicious." Kevin Anderson, who had been quiet since the electrical incident, suddenly perked up with renewed authority. "Actually, aircraft sabotage is a federal crime. If there's evidence of tampering, the FBI would get involved. Maybe we should mention these concerns to security." Damon felt the familiar chill that came with being black in a space where white people had decided he didn't belong. He'd seen this progression before, questioning his right to be somewhere, then questioning his credentials, then questioning his motives, and finally suggesting criminal behavior. It was a pattern as predictable as it was infuriating. Sir Maria Gonzalez appeared beside him as they prepared to deplane. "I'm sorry about what happened with the seating situation. You handled that with remarkable grace." "Thank you," Damon replied. "These things happen." Maria lowered her voice. "Between you and me, your response was more professional than I see from most corporate executives. What line of work are you in?" It was an innocent question, but Damon had learned to be careful about revealing his identity in situations like this. Once people knew he was a billionaire CEO, their entire demeanor changed, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but always in ways that reminded him that he was seen as an exception rather than simply a person. "I work in aviation technology," he said carefully. "Defense contracts mostly." Maria's eyebrows raised slightly. "Really? That's fascinating. I bet you understand aircraft systems better than most passengers." "A bit." Damon smiled. "Enough to know that electrical issues like this are usually straightforward to diagnose and repair." As they shuffled toward the aircraft door, Damon's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant Pentagon meeting confirmed for 2 p.m. "All materials ready. DoD officials excited to finalize contract. Safe travels." He glanced at his watch, 8:15 a.m. Even with a mechanical delay, he should easily make the meeting that would transform Pierce Aviation Technologies from a major defense contractor to an indispensable partner in national security. The Eagle Eye navigation system his team had developed represented 5 years of innovation and $200 million in research and development. Once implemented across the military fleet, it would save countless lives and secure American technological superiority for decades. But as he watched Stephanie Caldwell ahead of him in the deplaning line, still muttering to Brenda about suspicious timing and people who don't belong, Damon wondered if the universe had other plans for his morning. In the gate area, Jessica Williams was coordinating with the maintenance team. Frank Davis, the head technician, emerged from the aircraft after a preliminary inspection. "Looks like we've got damage to the avionics panel under 2A, he told her. "Something heavy hit it hard enough to crack the housing and fry some circuits. We're going to need to pull the panel and assess what needs replacement." "How long?" Jessica asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Depends on what we find. Could be an hour, could be all day if we need specialized parts." As Frank headed back onto the aircraft with his team, neither he nor Jessica noticed that the something heavy that had damaged the avionics panel was still in the gate area. Stephanie Caldwell's oversized Louis Vuitton carry-on, which had been slammed down with considerable force during her seating argument. The morning that had started with a simple case of seat entitlement was about to become something much larger with consequences that would reach far beyond a delayed flight. And at the center of it all was a man whose identity remained hidden, whose company had built the very technology that was now damaged, and whose calm response to injustice was about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. The gate area buzzed with the controlled chaos of 200 displaced passengers, their morning routines shattered by the unexpected mechanical delay. Flight 1425's departure time had been pushed back indefinitely, and tempers were beginning to fray as people calculated missed connections, delayed meetings, and disrupted plans. David Taylor, the federal air marshal who had been discreetly positioned in row 7, now stood near the gate counter with heightened awareness. At 45, he'd seen enough aviation incidents to know that electrical malfunctions, while usually innocent, required serious investigation. His trained eye swept the crowd, cataloging behaviors, watching for signs of nervousness or guilt. What caught his attention wasn't suspicious behavior, it was the complete opposite. While most passengers were agitated, frustrated, or anxiously checking their phones, the black man from seat 2A stood calmly by the window making quiet phone calls and occasionally helping elderly passengers find seating in the crowded gate area. "Interesting," David muttered to himself, making a mental note to keep observing. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, Frank Davis and his maintenance team were discovering that the electrical damage was more extensive than initially apparent. Carmen Castillo, the avionics specialist, emerged from beneath the panel under seat 2A with a grim expression. "Frank, you need to see this," she called out. Frank crawled into the cramped space beneath the seat, his flashlight illuminating the damaged components. What he saw made him whistle low. "That's not normal wear and tear," he said, backing out of the space. Something hit this panel hard enough to crack the housing and short-circuit the entire navigation backup relay. "Look at these impact patterns." Carmen nodded grimly. The primary nav system is fine, but FAA regulations require redundant backups for commercial flights. Without this relay, we're grounded until replacement. How long for a replacement? Frank asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. That's the problem. This isn't a standard component. It's a custom Pierce aviation unit, part of their Eagle Eye navigation system. We'd need authorization from the manufacturer to access replacement parts. Frank's frown deepened. Pierce Aviation Technologies was the premier defense contractor for aviation systems, but their security protocols were notoriously tight. Getting emergency parts authorization could take hours, even under the best circumstances. Sarah Brown, United's operations manager, had arrived to coordinate the response to what was now a significant operational disruption. At 41, she'd handled countless mechanical delays, but something about this situation felt different. The passenger complaints, the electrical damage, and the growing social media attention were creating a perfect storm. "What's our timeline?" she asked Frank as he emerged from the aircraft. "Depends on parts availability. This is specialized military-grade equipment. Could be 8 to 12 hours minimum." Sarah's face went pale. An 8-hour delay would cascade through United's entire daily operation, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars and affecting thousands of passengers. Isn't there any way to expedite the process? "Only if we can get direct authorization from Pierce Aviation's CEO." Carmen interjected. "Their security protocols require top-level approval for emergency military component releases. Then get me their CEO's contact information," Sarah said immediately. "It's not that simple," Frank replied. "Pierce Aviation doesn't just hand out CEO contact details. We're talking about classified defense technology. There are protocols, security clearances, federal oversight." He was interrupted by the arrival of Captain James Rodriguez, the 51-year-old pilot who had just finished his pre-flight inspections. James had been flying for United for 15 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this one. "Status report," he asked. Frank briefed him on the technical issues while Sarah explained the operational challenges. As they talked, none of them noticed that Damon Pierce had finished his phone calls and was now standing close enough to overhear their conversation. "Pierce Aviation," Damon said quietly. The 3 airline employees turned toward him. "Excuse me," Sarah asked. "You mentioned Pierce Aviation Technologies," Damon said. "I work in that industry. I might be able to help expedite the parts request." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "You know someone at Pierce Aviation?" "You could say that," Damon replied carefully. "What specific component are you looking for?" Carmen pulled out her tablet displaying the technical specifications. "Eagle Eye Navigation Relay Model EE22847. It's a backup system component for military-grade aviation nav systems." Damon studied the display, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he nodded. "I'm familiar with that unit. The authorization process is indeed complex, but there are emergency protocols for aircraft grounded with passengers aboard." "Can you help us navigate the process?" Sarah asked hopefully. "I can make some calls," Damon said, "but I'll need to speak with my contacts privately. Security protocols, you understand." As Damon walked away to make his calls, Frank and Carmen exchanged glances. "Think he's legit?" Carmen asked. "Guy seems to know what he's talking about," Frank replied. "And at this point, we need all the help we can get." Meanwhile, back in the gate area, Stephanie Caldwell was holding court with a growing audience of frustrated passengers. Her initial conspiracy theories about Damon's involvement had evolved into full-blown accusations fueled by the validation she was receiving from other equally frustrated travelers. "I'm telling you, the timing is too convenient," she was saying to a group of about 15 passengers. "This man causes a huge scene about seating, gets forced to move, and then suddenly there's a mysterious electrical problem, exactly where he was sitting." "Come on," Kevin Anderson, still enjoying his role as legal expert, nodded sagely. "In tort law, we call that coincidence beyond reasonable explanation. It suggests deliberate action. Brenda Morrison chimed in. Plus, did you see how calm he was when the sparks started flying? Normal people would be panicked, but he acted like he knew exactly what was going to happen. Diego Morales, still live streaming, was capturing all of this for his now 25,000 viewers. The comments section of his stream was exploding with reactions, some supporting Stephanie's conspiracy theories, others defending the man who had been forced from his seat. Luna Martinez had heard enough. Standing up from her gate area chair, she faced the group with the authority of someone accustomed to life or death situations. "Listen to yourselves," she said loudly enough for the entire gate area to hear. "You're accusing a man of committing a federal crime because he was polite enough to give up his seat to avoid conflict. Have you lost your minds? We're not accusing anyone of anything," Stephanie replied defensively. "We're just pointing out suspicious circumstances. No, you're creating a mob mentality based on racism and paranoia," Luna shot back. "That man has been nothing but helpful and professional, while you've been creating drama since the moment you stepped on that plane." The gate area fell silent. Luna had said what many were thinking, but few had the courage to voice. Robert Johnson, the elderly passenger who had been quietly observing everything, cleared his throat. "The young lady is right," he said in a voice that carried the authority of his 73 years. "I watched that entire interaction on the plane. The gentleman in question handled an unreasonable situation with remarkable grace. Now you're trying to destroy his reputation based on coincidence and speculation." Diego captured this moment, live, recognizing that the story was evolving beyond simple passenger drama into something much more significant about prejudice, assumptions, and mob mentality. David Taylor, the air marshal, had been listening to everything while maintaining his cover. His assessment of the situation was becoming clearer by the minute. The real threat to aircraft safety wasn't the calm man making helpful phone calls, but the woman creating conspiracy theories and inflaming other passengers. As if summoned by the brewing tension, Miguel Torres approached with news that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the gate area, "I have an update on our mechanical situation. We're working with technical specialists to expedite the repair process, but it's looking like a significant delay. We're arranging meal vouchers and rebooking assistance for those who need alternative travel arrangements." "How significant," someone called out. "Potentially 8 to 12 hours, Miguel replied, triggering a wave of groans and complaints. Stephanie Caldwell felt her world crumbling. 8 to 12 hours meant missing her meeting with Patricia Vanderbilt entirely. Her last chance to save her real estate company would slip away because of a mechanical problem that she was increasingly convinced was no accident. "This is unacceptable," she declared. "If this delay is due to sabotage, someone needs to be held accountable. I demand that security investigate that man's involvement in this incident." She pointed directly at Damon Pierce, who was still on the phone near the window, quietly coordinating what appeared to be a complex technical discussion. David Taylor decided it was time to step forward and identify himself. What happened next would determine whether this situation could be resolved professionally or would require federal intervention. The morning's events had set the stage for a confrontation that would test everyone's assumptions about justice, authority, and the true meaning of accountability. David Taylor's decision to reveal himself as a federal air marshal sent a ripple of tension through the already agitated gate area. His quiet authority and official credentials immediately shifted the dynamic, transforming what had been a passenger complaint session into something approaching a formal investigation. "I'm Air Marshal David Taylor," he announced, displaying his credentials to Miguel Torres and the gathering crowd. "I've been monitoring this situation, and I think it's time we address some of the concerns that have been raised." Stephanie Caldwell felt a surge of vindication. Finally, someone with real authority was taking her suspicions seriously. She stepped forward eagerly. "Marshal Taylor, thank you. I've been trying to tell everyone that there's something suspicious about this mechanical failure. The timing, the location of the damage, the behavior of that man. She pointed again toward Damon. "It's too convenient to be coincidental." David studied her for a long moment, then looked around the gate area at the faces watching this confrontation. His 20 years of law enforcement experience had taught him to read situations carefully to separate genuine concerns from hysteria and prejudice. "Ma'am, what specifically are you alleging?" he asked. "I'm alleging that he," she pointed at Damon again, "somehow damaged that airplane in retaliation for being asked to move from a seat he wasn't supposed to be in." "Just to be clear," David said slowly, "you're accusing a fellow passenger of committing aircraft sabotage, which is a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison because he was involved in a seating dispute." When laid out in those terms, Stephanie's accusation sounded even more outrageous than she'd intended, but she was too invested in her theory to back down now. "I'm saying there are too many coincidences to ignore. He caused a scene about the seating acted suspicious when he moved, and then there's electrical damage exactly where he was sitting. Plus, look how calm he is about all this. Normal people would be upset about a flight delay." David nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And you witnessed him tampering with aircraft systems?" "Well, no, not directly. But did anyone witness him tampering with aircraft systems?" Silence fell over the group. Even Kevin Anderson and Brenda Morrison, who had been supporting Stephanie's conspiracy theory, suddenly found themselves unable to provide any actual evidence. Meanwhile, Frank Davis and his maintenance team were making discoveries that would soon illuminate the truth about the electrical damage. Inside the aircraft, Carmen Castillo had been carefully photographing the damaged components and documenting the impact patterns. "Frank," she called out, "you really need to see this." Frank crawled back under the seat, following Carmen's flashlight beam to a specific section of the damaged panel. "Look at the impact pattern here," Carmen said, pointing to a series of scratches and dents in the metal housing. This wasn't caused by electrical failure or component wear. Something heavy hit this panel from above with considerable force. Frank examined the damage more closely. The pattern was unmistakable parallel scratches consistent with the metal reinforcement strips found on high-end luggage and an impact zone that suggested a heavy object dropped from seat height. This was definitely external impact damage, he confirmed. Something heavy was dropped or thrown onto this panel hard enough to crack the housing and short the circuits. During the seating argument, maybe, Carmen suggested. Frank's expression darkened as the implications became clear. "We need to document everything and report this to operations immediately. If a passenger's actions cause this damage, that's a federal offense." Sarah Brown, who had been coordinating with corporate headquarters about the delay, received Frank's call with growing alarm. "You're saying this wasn't a random equipment failure?" she asked. "Definitely not. This was impact damage from above. Something hit the panel hard enough to cause significant electrical failure. We need to review the cabin security footage from boarding." While the maintenance team documented their findings, Antonio Hernandez, the regional maintenance chief, arrived to assess the broader implications of the damage. At 47, Antonio had 30 years of aviation experience and had never seen impact damage quite like this. "Show me what you've got," he told Frank. After examining the evidence, Antonio whistled low. "This is going to require a complete system replacement. The Eagle Eye navigation relay is fried, but more importantly, the backup power distribution is compromised. FAA won't let us fly until we replace the entire module." "Timeline?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "That's the challenge. This is Pierce Aviation's military-grade Eagle Eye system. We're talking about classified defense technology with strict security protocols. Even with emergency authorization, we're looking at 6 to 8 hours minimum. Can't we bypass the system? Not legally. Federal regulations require redundant navigation systems for commercial flights. We need Pierce Aviation's CEO to authorize emergency parts release, and even then we need their certified technicians to install and calibrate the system." Sarah felt the weight of operational disaster settling on her shoulders. 8 hours would cost United hundreds of thousands of dollars, affect thousands of passengers, and likely make national news. But what came next would make the financial cost seem trivial. Michael Wilson, an FAA inspector, had been called to investigate the unusual circumstances of the electrical failure. His preliminary review of the maintenance documentation raised immediate red flags. This pattern of damage, he told Antonio, suggests deliberate impact rather than equipment failure. That changes everything from a regulatory standpoint. We're looking at possible criminal activity affecting aircraft safety. Criminal activity. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. If a passenger deliberately damaged aircraft systems, that's federal aircraft sabotage. I need to coordinate with airport security and potentially the FBI. Back in the gate area, the tension was escalating as passengers grew increasingly frustrated with the indefinite delay. Diego Morales' live stream had attracted over 40,000 viewers, and social media was beginning to pick up the story under hashtags like Flight Delay Drama and Seat Stealer Karen. Stephanie Caldwell, feeling the pressure of public scrutiny, doubled down on her accusations. I want that man's background checked, she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. I want to know who he really is and why he's so calm about this situation. Normal people don't act like this. Luna Martinez had reached her breaking point. Standing up from her chair, she faced Stephanie with the controlled fury of someone who had spent her career dealing with life or death emergencies. Normal people? Luna's voice carried across the entire gate area. Let me tell you what normal people do. Normal people help elderly passengers find seating during delays. Normal people offer their phone chargers to families with crying children. Normal people remain calm during emergencies instead of creating chaos and spreading conspiracy theories. She pointed toward Damon, who was still quietly making phone calls by the window. That man has been the only person in this gate area acting normally. You've been creating drama, spreading lies, and trying to destroy someone's reputation because you couldn't handle being told no about an airplane seat. Applause broke out from several passengers who had been silently supporting Luna's perspective. But the division in the gate area was becoming more pronounced, with some passengers still supporting Stephanie's suspicions. Robert Johnson, the elderly passenger, stood up slowly. His 73 years gave him a perspective that cut through the noise. I've been flying for 50 years, he said in a voice that commanded attention. I've seen every kind of passenger, every kind of delay, every kind of crisis. What I've never seen is someone handled with such dignity being accused of federal crimes based on nothing but prejudice and paranoia. Kevin Anderson, feeling his legal expertise being challenged, tried to maintain his position. Due diligence isn't prejudice. When unusual circumstances arise, investigation is warranted. Investigation based on what Luna shot back. The fact that he remained calm under pressure. The fact that he tried to help other passengers. The fact that he gave up his seat to avoid conflict. Which of those behaviors suggests criminal activity? Diego captured all of this for his live stream audience, providing running commentary for viewers who were increasingly taking sides in what had become a national conversation about racial profiling and mob mentality. Guys, this is getting intense, he whispered to his camera. We're basically watching social media justice play out in real time. The question is, what happens when the truth comes out? As if summoned by his words, Damon Pierce finished his phone calls and began walking back toward the maintenance area where Sarah Brown, Frank Davis, and the growing team of officials were coordinating their response. Excuse me, Damon said to Sarah. I've spoken with my contacts at Pierce Aviation. There might be a way to expedite the parts authorization. Sarah looked up hopefully. Really? What did they say? The emergency protocols require CEO-level authorization, but they've agreed to expedite the process if we can provide proper identification and security clearance verification. Do you have contacts high enough in the organization to reach the CEO level? Frank asked skeptically. You could say that, Damon replied. Antonio Hernandez had been listening to this conversation with growing interest. "What's your background in aviation technology?" he asked. "I work closely with Pierce Aviation on various projects," Damon replied. "Defense contracts mostly. I understand their security protocols and emergency procedures." "Interesting," Michael Wilson interjected. "What type of security clearance do you hold top secret with SCI access?" Damon replied without hesitation. That stopped everyone in their tracks. Sensitive compartmented information access was among the highest levels of security clearance held by only a small number of defense contractors and government officials. "Can you verify that?" Wilson asked. "I can provide the necessary credentials," Damon replied, "but I'll need to speak with my security team first. Government clearances aren't something you display casually in public." Frank Davis was beginning to piece together a picture that didn't match what the passengers in the gate area had been suggesting. A man with top-secret clearance, extensive knowledge of Pierce aviation systems, and the professional demeanor of someone accustomed to handling crises, this wasn't the profile of a saboteur, Sir Frank said carefully. "Exactly what is your relationship with Pierce Aviation Technologies?" Damon looked around at the faces watching him, the maintenance crew, the FAA inspector, the operations manager, and beyond them the gate area full of passengers whose morning had been turned upside down by events none of them fully understood yet. "That's complicated," he said finally. "But I think I can help resolve your parts authorization issue. May I make one more phone call?" As Damon walked away to make his call, the maintenance team exchanged glances. Carmen Castillo voiced what they were all thinking. "Either that guy is the best con artist I've ever met, or there's a lot more to this story than we've been told." Antonio nodded slowly. "Something tells me we're about to find out which one it is." In the gate area, Stephanie Caldwell watched Damon's interaction with the official-looking group of people near the aircraft. Her conspiracy theories were becoming harder to maintain as she observed his professional demeanor and the respectful way the aviation professionals were treating him. But her desperation about missing the Patricia Vanderbilt meeting was overriding her rational thinking. 8 hours would destroy her last chance to save her company. If this man was somehow responsible for the delay, even indirectly, she needed him to face consequences. "Look at him over there," she said to Brenda, "acting like he's some kind of expert. I bet he's just trying to talk his way out of trouble." But Brenda was beginning to have doubts. The man's calm professionalism, his apparent knowledge of aviation systems, and his respectful treatment by the airline officials didn't match the picture of a saboteur that Stephanie had been painting. "Maybe we should just wait and see what happens," Brenda suggested quietly. "Wait and see." Stephanie's voice cracked with stress. "While that man destroys people's lives with his little revenge plot, I don't think so." Diego Morales caught all of this on his live stream, recognizing that the story was building toward some kind of revelation that would either vindicate or destroy the conspiracy theories that had been spreading through social media. "I don't know about you guys," he said to his camera, "but I'm getting the feeling that we're missing some major piece of this puzzle. Stay tuned, because I think the truth is about to come out." As if on cue, Damon Pierce finished his phone call and began walking back toward the group of officials. His expression was calm but determined, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who was about to change the entire trajectory of the morning's events. The revelation that would transform everyone's understanding of the situation was now just moments away. The first crack in the wall of anonymity came from an unexpected source. Diego Morales' live stream, viewers had become amateur detectives cross-referencing flight manifests, social media posts, and public records with the dedication of true crime enthusiasts. What they found sent shockwaves through the comment section that Diego couldn't ignore. "Guys, I'm reading these comments and..." "Wow," Diego whispered into his camera, trying to keep his voice low. "Someone just linked a Forbes article about defense contractors. You need to see this." He held up his phone to show the Forbes headline, Pierce Aviation Technologies secures record $12 billion defense contract for revolutionary navigation system. The accompanying photo showed a black man in a business suit standing next to military aircraft. The CEO's name is Damon Pierce Diego, read quietly. Founded the company in 2003, revolutionized military aviation technology worth an estimated $9.2 billion. He looked up from his phone toward where Damon was standing, then back at the photo. Guys, I think we just figured out who the man in the gray sweater really is. The revelation spread through social media like wildfire, but in the gate area, most passengers were still unaware of the dramatic identity confirmation happening online. However, the real-world clues were beginning to accumulate for those paying attention. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the psychology professor, had been observing Damon's behavior with academic interest. What struck her wasn't just his composure under pressure, it was his unconscious authority when discussing technical matters. "Excuse me." She approached him during a break in his phone calls. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the maintenance team earlier. You seem remarkably knowledgeable about aircraft systems." Damon smiled politely. "I work in the industry. You pick up technical knowledge over time." "Aviation engineering, Doctor." Morgan probed gently. "Something like that. Defense contracts mostly? Military applications?" Dr. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "That would explain your security clearance and your calm demeanor during crises. Military contractors deal with high-pressure situations regularly." You could say that Damon replied with a slight smile that suggested he was understating things significantly. Meanwhile, Robert Johnson, the 73-year-old retired businessman, was conducting his own quiet investigation. His decades of experience in corporate America had given him an eye for recognizing fellow executives, and everything about Damon's bearing screamed senior leadership. Young man Robert said, approaching Damon as he finished another phone call, "I don't want to pry, but I get the sense you're not just any defense contractor employee." Damon studied the elderly man's face, seeing genuine curiosity rather than accusation. "What makes you say that 40 years in business teaches you to recognize authority? The way you handle yourself, the way you problem solve, the way other people respond to you. You're not middle management." "I do okay," Damon replied modestly. "I imagine you do." Robert's smile was knowing. "I also imagine there's going to be some very embarrassed people in this gate area when the full truth comes out." Back near the aircraft, the technical investigation was yielding crucial information. Frank Davis had completed his documentation of the damage patterns, and the evidence was clear: the electrical panel had been struck by something heavy during the boarding process. The impact occurred from above at seat level, Frank reported to Sarah Brown and Michael Wilson. Based on the scratch patterns and force distribution, it was likely a hard-shell suitcase with metal reinforcement strips. During the seating dispute, Sarah asked, "That's the most probable time frame. And given the location of the damage directly under seat 2A, it had to happen during the argument about that specific seat." Wilson made careful notes. "So we're looking at accidental damage during a passenger altercation, not deliberate sabotage. That's what the evidence suggests. Someone's luggage hit the panel hard enough to crack the housing and fry the circuits." Carmen Castillo, who had been reviewing the passenger manifest, looked up with a significant expression. "I've got something else you should know. I've been researching Pierce Aviation Technologies, the company that manufactured the damaged navigation system." "What about them?" Sarah asked. "Their CEO is a man named Damon Pierce, and according to this manifest, there's a Damon Pierce in seat 2A on our flight." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Frank, Carmen, Sarah, and Wilson all stared at each other as the implications sank in. "You're saying," Wilson spoke slowly, "that the passenger who's been accused of sabotage is actually the CEO of the company that built the system that was damaged?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Carmen replied. "And if that's true, then this entire situation just became a lot more complicated." Inside the gate area, Luna Martinez was conducting her own research on her phone. As a medical professional, she was used to gathering evidence before making diagnoses, and the evidence she was finding painted a very different picture than Stephanie's accusations suggested. "This is interesting," she said to the passenger sitting next to her, a college professor named Dr. Sarah Kim. "I looked up Pierce Aviation Technologies, and they're one of the largest defense contractors in the country. Their CEO is named Damon Pierce." Dr. Kim's eyebrows raised. "You think there's a connection to our fellow passenger? Look at this photo from last year's Defense Industry Conference." Luna held up her phone showing a picture of Damon Pierce accepting an innovation award from the Pentagon. The man in the photo was definitely the same person who had given up his seat that morning. "Oh my God," Dr. Kim breathed. "That woman has been accusing a billionaire CEO of sabotaging his own company's technology." Word of these discoveries was beginning to spread through the gate area in whispers and discreet phone sharing. A few passengers were putting the pieces together, but Stephanie Caldwell and her remaining supporters were still focused on their conspiracy theories. Kevin Anderson, however, was beginning to have serious concerns about his legal exposure. If Damon Pierce was indeed a prominent business executive, the false accusations could potentially lead to defamation lawsuits. He quietly pulled out his phone and began his own research. What he found made his blood run cold. Not only was Damon Pierce the CEO of a major defense contractor, but Pierce Aviation Technologies had a legal department known for aggressively protecting the company's reputation. Kevin had unknowingly involved himself in the public defamation of one of the most powerful men in the aviation industry. "Brenda," he whispered urgently to Stephanie's friend, "we need to talk, privately." Brenda looked at his pale face and followed him to a quiet corner of the gate area. "I've been researching our fellow passenger," Kevin said quietly. "We have a problem. A big problem." What kind of problem? Kevin showed her his phone screen. "That's the kind of problem. Stephanie has been accusing Damon Pierce, as in Pierce Aviation Technologies, Damon Pierce, of sabotaging an aircraft system that his own company manufactured." Brenda's face went white. Even she, with her limited knowledge of business, understood the magnitude of what Kevin was telling her. "How certain are you?" she asked. 99%. Same name, same face, and he mentioned working in defense contracts with top-secret clearance. Plus, look at how the airline staff has been treating him. They're being respectful, not suspicious. Brenda looked across the gate area at Stephanie, who was still holding court with a small group of passengers, still insisting that Damon was somehow responsible for the delay. "We need to warn her," Brenda said. "Warn her of what?" "That she's been publicly accusing one of the wealthiest men in America of federal crimes based on nothing but paranoid speculation. I don't think there's any coming back from this." Diego Morales' live stream had become the epicenter of the online investigation. His viewer count had climbed past 75,000, and the comments were moving so fast that he could barely keep up. "Okay, guys, this is insane," he said to his camera. "The comments are confirming it. Multiple sources, multiple verification points. The man being accused of sabotage is Damon Pierce, CEO of Pierce Aviation Technologies, worth over $9 billion, flying to sign a $15 billion Pentagon contract." He panned his camera toward Stephanie, who was still ranting to her diminished audience. "She has no idea who she's messing with. This is about to become the biggest airline justice story of the year." Dr. Morgan, the psychology professor, was taking detailed notes about the group dynamics she was observing. The situation had become a perfect case study in how confirmation bias, social pressure, and prejudice could lead to catastrophic misjudgments. "What's particularly fascinating," she said to Dr. Kim, who was sitting nearby, "is how the accusers are maintaining their beliefs even as evidence contradicts their theories. It's cognitive dissonance in real time." "Should we warn them?" Dr. Kim asked. "Would they listen? They've invested so much social capital in their accusations that admitting error would require acknowledging some very uncomfortable truths about their assumptions and biases." As if summoned by their conversation, Stephanie Caldwell approached their seating area. Her stress levels were clearly escalating as she noticed more passengers pulling away from her conspiracy theories. "I know you two have been talking about me," she said accusingly. "Are you going to help me get justice, or are you going to sit there and enable a criminal?" Dr. Morgan looked at her with genuine concern. "Ms. Caldwell, have you considered the possibility that your suspicions might be unfounded?" Unfounded. The evidence is right in front of us. He causes a scene, damages the plane, and then conveniently offers to help fix it. How is that not obvious? "What evidence?" Dr. Kim asked gently. "I mean actual evidence, not circumstantial coincidences." Stephanie stared at them as if they'd asked her to explain why the sky was blue. The timing, the behavior, the suspicious technical knowledge. Technical knowledge, Dr. Morgan interrupted, that might be explained by his actual profession rather than criminal intent. "What do you mean, his actual profession?" Dr. Kim and Dr. Morgan exchanged glances. They were about to deliver information that would either shock Stephanie into recognition of her error or push her further into paranoid denial. "Ms. Caldwell," Dr. Kim said gently, "have you researched who Damon Pierce actually is? I know he's a liar and a saboteur." "He's the CEO of Pierce Aviation Technologies," Dr. Morgan said quietly. "The company that manufactured the navigation system that was damaged. He's worth over $9 billion and is flying to Washington to sign a defense contract worth $15 billion. The color drained from Stephanie's face. For a moment, she stood frozen, processing information that completely contradicted everything she'd believed for the past 3 hours. Then, instead of acknowledging her error, she doubled down. "That's impossible," she said firmly. "You're making that up to protect him." Dr. Morgan and Dr. Kim stared at her in disbelief. Even when presented with clear, verifiable facts, Stephanie was choosing to maintain her conspiracy theory rather than admit she'd been wrong. "Ms. Caldwell," Dr. Morgan said carefully, "this information is easily verifiable. A simple Google search." "I don't care what Google says," Stephanie snapped. "I know what I saw, and I know what happened. That man is responsible for this delay, and I'm not going to let him destroy people's lives just because he has money." As Stephanie walked away, Dr. Morgan shook her head sadly. That, she said to Dr. Kim, is how conspiracy theories survive even when confronted with contradictory evidence. The believer has too much invested in being right to accept being wrong. Meanwhile, Damon Pierce was finishing another phone call that would soon change everything. The conversation had been with his head of security, who had been monitoring social media mentions of the company and had discovered Diego's live stream. "Sir," his security chief had said, "you need to know that your identity has been revealed online. The passenger accusations are going viral, but so is the information about who you really are. This is about to become a very public relations situation." Damon looked around the gate area at the faces of people who had spent the morning judging him, accusing him, and assuming the worst about his character and motives. Soon they would all know exactly who he was and what he represented. The revelation was inevitable now. The only question was whether it would lead to accountability and justice or to a different kind of chaos altogether. The convergence of online discovery and real-world investigation was reaching a critical mass that would soon explode into full public revelation. Diego Morales' livestream had become the focal point of a social media phenomenon with viewer counts exceeding 100,000 and news outlets beginning to pick up the story. But in the gate area, most passengers remained unaware that they were about to witness one of the most dramatic reversals in aviation history. Sarah Brown, the United Operations Manager, had just received the most important phone call of her career. Corporate headquarters had been monitoring the social media coverage and had confirmed what the maintenance team suspected: the passenger being accused of sabotage was indeed Damon Pierce, CEO of Pierce Aviation Technologies. "This changes everything," Sarah said to Michael Wilson, the FAA inspector. We're not just dealing with passenger misconduct anymore. We're dealing with the public defamation of one of our most important aerospace partners." Wilson nodded grimly. "And if the damage was really caused by luggage impact during the seating dispute, we need to determine who was responsible for that impact." Frank Davis had completed his forensic analysis and was ready to present findings that would shift blame in a direction that Stephanie Caldwell never saw coming. Based on the impact pattern's trajectory analysis and damage assessment, Frank reported the electrical panel was struck by a hard-shell suitcase with metal reinforcement strips. The angle of impact suggests it was dropped or swung from seat 2B level during the boarding altercation. Seat 2B. Sarah asked for confirmation. "That's correct. The damage originated from above and to the right of the panel, which is consistent with luggage being handled aggressively in the aisle seat during the argument about seat assignments." Wilson made careful notes. "Do we know who was in seat 2B during that time frame?" "Initially Mr. Pierce, but he moved to accommodate Ms. Caldwell's demands. However, the damage pattern suggests it occurred before the seat switch when she was standing in the aisle with her carry-on. The implications were staggering. Stephanie Caldwell had spent 3 hours accusing Damon Pierce of sabotage when the evidence suggested that her own actions during the seating dispute had caused the very damage she was blaming him for. Carmen Castillo pulled up the passenger records on her tablet. Ms. Caldwell checked a large Louis Vuitton hardshell bag with metal corner reinforcements. Based on witness statements, she was aggressively handling it during the seating argument. "We need to review this with legal immediately," Sarah said. "If our findings are correct, we have a passenger who caused significant aircraft damage and then publicly accused an innocent party of sabotage." While the official investigation was reaching its conclusions, the social media revelation was accelerating beyond anyone's control. Diego's live stream had attracted attention from aviation journalists, business reporters, and civil rights activists who recognized the broader implications of the story. "This is bigger than just a flight delay. Now," Diego explained to his audience, which had grown to include viewers from around the world, "we're watching a real-time case study of how prejudice and assumption can lead to the public destruction of an innocent person's reputation. The man being accused is literally one of the most successful aerospace executives in America." Comments flooded in from viewers who had researched Pierce Aviation Technologies and found articles about Damon Pierce's rise from poverty to becoming one of the youngest black billionaires in history. The contrast between his actual achievements and the accusations being leveled against him was stark and disturbing. Inside the gate area, the passengers who had learned the truth were facing a moral dilemma: should they intervene to stop the continuing defamation, or should they allow events to play out naturally? Luna Martinez, who had been one of Damon's most vocal defenders, felt a growing sense of urgency. The longer Stephanie's accusations continued, the more damage they could cause to everyone involved. "I can't watch this anymore," she said to Robert Johnson. "That woman is destroying herself and potentially committing defamation against someone who could sue her into oblivion." Robert nodded sadly. "The tragedy is that she's had multiple opportunities to reconsider her position, but pride and prejudice have locked her into a path of self-destruction." Dr. Morgan, the psychology professor, was documenting what she recognized as a textbook case of cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, spiraling into public catastrophe. "This is what happens," she said to Dr. Kim, "when people become so invested in being right that they can't accept evidence that contradicts their beliefs." She's about to face consequences that could have been avoided with simple humility. Kevin Anderson, the lawyer who had initially supported Stephanie's theories, was now in full damage control mode. He'd researched Pierce Aviation's legal department and discovered they had a reputation for aggressively pursuing defamation cases against anyone who falsely accused the company or its executives of wrongdoing. "I need to distance myself from this immediately," he told Brenda quietly. "If Mr. Pierce decides to pursue legal action, anyone who supported these accusations could be named as co-defendants." Brenda looked across the gate area at Stephanie, who was still trying to convince the remaining passengers that her conspiracy theories were correct. Should we warn her? I tried. She's not listening to reason. At this point, she's on her own. Meanwhile, Captain James Rodriguez had arrived in the gate area to address the growing crowd of frustrated passengers. His announcement would inadvertently set the stage for the dramatic revelation that was about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years of commercial aviation experience. "I want to personally apologize for the extended delay. Our maintenance team has completed their investigation into the electrical failure, and I can report that we've identified both the cause and the solution." The gate area fell silent as 200 passengers focused on getting answers they'd been waiting for all morning. The damage to our navigation system was caused by external impact during the boarding process. Captain Rodriguez continued. It was not a random equipment failure, nor was it the result of any malicious activity. However, the repairs require specialized components that are being expedited to us now. Stephanie Caldwell seized on this announcement as vindication of her theories. External impact, she called out loudly. "That proves it was sabotage. I've been telling everyone all morning that man damaged this aircraft." But Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished with his announcement. "I also want to address some concerns that have been raised about passenger conduct. Our investigation, including review of maintenance evidence and witness statements, has determined that the damage was accidental, occurring during a luggage handling incident associated with a seating dispute in first class." The implications of this statement sent a ripple of understanding through the passengers who had been following the investigation. If the damage was caused by luggage during the seating dispute, it wasn't Damon who had caused it. Diego captured the crowd's reaction on his live stream. "Guys, I think everyone just realized what the captain is really saying. The damage wasn't caused by the man she's been accusing. It was caused by her luggage during the argument about seats." Stephanie's face went pale as the meaning of the captain's words sank in. But instead of accepting responsibility, she doubled down one final time. "That's impossible," she declared loudly. "I was careful with my luggage. If there was impact damage, it had to be from him doing something to the aircraft systems." Her denial was so complete, so divorced from the evidence that had just been presented, that even her last remaining supporters began to back away. David Taylor, the air marshal, decided it was time to take control of a situation that was spiraling toward complete chaos. "Ma'am," he said, approaching Stephanie with official authority, "I need you to stop making accusations and allow the investigation to proceed professionally." "Investigation?" Stephanie's voice cracked with desperation. "The investigation should be focused on him. He's the one with suspicious technical knowledge. He's the one who was so calm about the delay. He's the one who offered to help with the repairs, as if summoned by her accusations." Damon Pierce finished his latest phone call and began walking toward the group gathered around Captain Rodriguez. His expression was calm but determined, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who was about to resolve the situation once and for all. "Excuse me, Captain Damon," said his voice carrying clearly through the now silent gate area. "I've spoken with my security team about expediting the parts authorization for the Eagle Eye navigation system. We can have the replacement component here within the hour." Captain Rodriguez looked confused. "Your security team, Sir Pierce Aviation Technologies Security," Damon clarified. "I'm Damon Pierce, the company's CEO." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. It was the sound of 200 people simultaneously realizing that everything they thought they understood about the morning's events had been completely wrong. Stephanie Caldwell stood frozen, her mouth open as the full magnitude of her mistake crashed over her like a tsunami. For 3 hours, she had been publicly accusing the CEO of Pierce Aviation Technologies, one of America's largest defense contractors, of sabotaging aircraft systems that his own company had designed and manufactured. Diego's live stream exploded with reactions as his 100,000-plus viewers witnessed the moment of revelation in real time. "Oh my God," Diego whispered to his camera. "She just accused a $9 billion CEO of sabotaging his own technology. This is the most incredible plot twist I've ever seen." The aftermath of the revelation was immediate and devastating. Kevin Anderson quietly disappeared into the crowd, hoping to avoid association with the conspiracy theories he had supported. Brenda Morrison covered her face with her hands, realizing she had participated in the public humiliation of an innocent man. Dr. Morgan began taking rapid notes about the psychology of cognitive collapse when confronted with undeniable contradictory evidence. But the person everyone was watching was Stephanie Caldwell, whose world had just imploded in the most public way possible. The meeting she had been desperate to attend, the business she had been trying to save, the reputation she had been fighting to maintain. All of it was now secondary to the realization that she had potentially committed defamation against one of the most powerful men in American aviation. The morning that had started with a stolen airplane seat was about to end with consequences that would extend far beyond anyone's imagination. The only question now was whether justice would be tempered by mercy, or whether the full weight of accountability would fall on those who had chosen prejudice over evidence, assumption over investigation, and conspiracy over truth. The silence that followed Damon Pierce's identity revelation was unlike anything the veteran airport staff had ever witnessed. It was the sound of 200 people simultaneously processing information that completely overturned everything they believed about the morning's events. The casual bombshell, delivered with the same calm professionalism Damon had maintained throughout 3 hours of false accusations, hung in the air like a verdict that couldn't be appealed. Captain Rodriguez was the first to find his voice, his 15 years of commercial aviation experience having never prepared him for a moment quite like this. "Mr. Pierce," he said carefully, "you're saying you're the CEO of Pierce Aviation Technologies, the company that manufactured our navigation system." "That's correct," Damon replied, pulling out his corporate identification and military contractor security clearance. "I've been coordinating with our Denver facility to expedite the replacement of the Eagle Eye navigation module that was damaged this morning." Sarah Brown, who had been managing the operational crisis, felt the blood drain from her face as the full implications hit her. United Airlines had just allowed one of their most important aerospace partners to be publicly accused of sabotage, humiliated in front of hundreds of passengers, and recorded on social media for the world to see. "Sir, we had no idea," she stammered. "The passenger manifest just showed your name, not your title or company affiliation." "I prefer to travel without fanfare," Damon said simply. "It usually makes for a more peaceful journey." Diego Morales, still live streaming to over 120,000 viewers, was capturing every moment of what was becoming the most dramatic airline story of the year. "Guys, this is unreal," he whispered to his camera. "A billionaire CEO just revealed his identity after being accused of sabotaging his own technology. The comments are going absolutely insane. The social media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. Karen Meets Karma began trending globally within minutes. News outlets started picking up the story. Aviation industry publications were already drafting headlines about the dramatic revelation. But in the gate area, all eyes were on Stephanie Caldwell, whose face had gone completely white as the magnitude of her mistake became clear. For 3 hours, she had been publicly accusing one of America's most successful black entrepreneurs of federal crimes, based on nothing but her own prejudice and paranoia. This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You can't be!" "You can't. You're just what Damon asked quietly, his tone still calm but now carrying an edge that suggested his patience wasn't infinite. Stephanie's mouth opened and closed without sound. She couldn't finish the sentence because doing so would require her to admit the racist assumptions that had driven her accusations from the beginning. Frank Davis, the head maintenance technician, approached with his damage assessment report. The irony of the situation was about to become even more devastating. "Mr. Pierce Frank said respectfully, I need to report our findings about the cause of the electrical failure. The damage to your company's navigation system was caused by external impact during the boarding process. Specifically, it appears a heavy suitcase struck the panel hard enough to crack the housing and short the circuits. During the seating dispute, Damon asked. Yes, sir. The impact pattern suggests it occurred when luggage was being handled aggressively in the aisle during the argument about seat assignments. Frank's professional report was delivered without accusation, but everyone present understood the implication. Stephanie's own actions during her demand for the window seat had caused the very damage she'd been blaming on Damon. Michael Wilson, the FAA inspector, stepped forward with the official findings that would determine whether criminal charges might be filed. Based on our investigation, he announced the aircraft damage was accidental, caused by passenger luggage during a boarding altercation. However, the subsequent false accusations of sabotage directed at an innocent passenger constitute a serious matter that will be referred to appropriate authorities. The legal implications were staggering. Stephanie had not only caused significant aircraft damage through her aggressive behavior, but had then spent hours publicly defaming the CEO of a major corporation on social media platforms, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. Kevin Anderson, the lawyer who had initially supported Stephanie's theories, was quietly calculating his own legal exposure. Pierce Aviation Technologies was known for aggressively protecting their reputation, and anyone who had participated in spreading false accusations could potentially face defamation lawsuits. Dr. Morgan, the psychology professor, was documenting what she recognized as a complete cognitive collapse when confronted with undeniable contradictory evidence. This is textbook confirmation bias taken to its logical extreme, she noted quietly. Rather than questioning her assumptions when evidence contradicted them, she doubled down repeatedly until the gap between reality and belief became unbridgeable. Luna Martinez, who had spent the morning defending Damon against baseless accusations, felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication that her instincts about his character had been correct. Sadness that it had taken a billionaire's revelation to convince people that a black man deserved the benefit of the doubt. Mr. Pierce, she said, approaching him directly, I owe you an apology on behalf of everyone who should have spoken up sooner. What happened to you this morning was wrong regardless of who you are or what you do for a living. Damon looked at her with a genuine appreciation. You did speak up. You defended someone you didn't know based on principle, not position. That means everything. Robert Johnson, the 73-year-old retired businessman, was observing the scene with the perspective of someone who had witnessed significant social change over his lifetime. What troubles me most, he said to no one in particular, is how quickly people were willing to believe the worst about a man who had done nothing but show kindness and professionalism. That says something disturbing about our society. David Taylor, the air marshal, was coordinating with airport security about the next steps in what had become a complex federal investigation involving aircraft interference, false accusations, and potential defamation. Mr. Pierce, he said, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received this morning. Federal law enforcement takes aircraft sabotage allegations very seriously, and our investigation will reflect the actual facts rather than unfounded speculation. As officials huddled to discuss legal procedures and airline representatives tried to calculate the public relations damage, Damon Pierce pulled out his secure phone to authorize the emergency parts release that would finally get Flight 1425 back on schedule. The call took less than 2 minutes. 23 years of building Pierce Aviation Technologies from a garage startup to a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor had established protocols for exactly this type of emergency authorization. The replacement Eagle Eye module will be here within 30 minutes, he announced to Captain Rodriguez. Our installation team is already en route. We should have you back in the air within 2 hours. The efficiency with which he resolved the technical crisis that had grounded 200 passengers demonstrated exactly why Pierce Aviation Technologies had become one of America's premier aerospace contractors. But it also highlighted the absurdity of the morning's accusations. Why would someone sabotage technology his own company had spent 5 years and $200 million developing? As news of the revelation spread through the gate area, passengers began approaching Damon with apologies, thanks, and requests for selfies. The transformation from accused saboteur to celebrated CEO was complete, but it left uncomfortable questions about how quickly public opinion could be manipulated by prejudice and assumption. Stephanie Caldwell remained frozen in place, surrounded by the wreckage of her conspiracy theories and facing consequences that extended far beyond a missed business meeting. The woman who had started the morning demanding special treatment because of her frequent flyer status was now facing potential criminal charges and civil liability that could destroy her financially. The ultimate irony was that Damon Pierce, the man she had accused of trying to ruin people's lives, was the only person in the gate area with the power and resources to help her avoid complete destruction. Whether he would choose mercy or justice would determine not just her fate, but the kind of man he really was beneath the corporate titles and billion-dollar valuations. The morning's events had tested everyone's character. Now it was time to see how the story would end. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and it would be swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating for those who had chosen prejudice over evidence. The revelation of Damon Pierce's identity had transformed the gate area into a courtroom where justice would be dispensed not by judges and juries, but by the relentless accountability of public exposure and corporate consequences. David Taylor, the federal air marshal, was the first to begin the formal process of accountability. His investigation had been thorough, and the evidence was overwhelming. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, approaching Stephanie with official authority based on our investigation into this morning's incident, "I'm placing you under arrest for interference with aircraft operations under federal aviation regulations." The words hit Stephanie like physical blows. "Arrest. But I didn't. I was just..." "You caused damage to aircraft systems through reckless luggage handling during a boarding altercation." David continued reading from his incident report. "You then filed false accusations of sabotage against an innocent passenger, creating a public disturbance that required extensive law enforcement and airline resources to investigate." "This is insane." Stephanie's voice cracked with desperation. "I was trying to report a crime. I was trying to protect people." "You were," David replied calmly, spreading false accusations based on prejudice and assumption, while the actual evidence pointed to your own actions as the cause of the aircraft damage. Michael Wilson. The FAA inspector stepped forward with additional charges that would ensure this morning's events would haunt Stephanie for years to come. "Ms. Caldwell, the Federal Aviation Administration is also citing you for providing false information during a federal investigation, public disturbance in a secure aviation facility, and interference with commercial flight operations. These charges carry significant financial penalties and potential prison time." Stephanie's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a nearby chair. The business meeting she had been desperate to attend was now the least of her concerns. She was facing federal charges that could result in years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. But the federal consequences were only the beginning. Sarah Brown United's operations manager had been coordinating with corporate headquarters throughout the crisis. The airline's response would be swift and comprehensive. Ms. Caldwell Sarah announced, "United Airlines is immediately terminating your frequent flyer status and banning you from all United and partner airline services indefinitely. Additionally, we will be seeking reimbursement for all costs associated with this incident, including aircraft repairs crew, overtime passenger accommodations, and operational delays." The financial implications were staggering. Aircraft repairs alone would cost tens of thousands of dollars. The cascade effect of delaying Flight 1425 would impact hundreds of other passengers and dozens of connecting flights. The total bill could easily exceed $200,000. Kevin Anderson, the lawyer who had supported Stephanie's conspiracy theories, was quietly slipping away from the crowd, but Diego's live stream cameras caught his attempted escape. There goes the lawyer who was supporting the sabotage theories earlier. Diego narrated to his 130,000 viewers. He's trying to disappear now that he realizes he might be facing defamation liability. But Kevin's escape attempt was unsuccessful. Damon Pierce's corporate security team had been monitoring the social media coverage and had identified everyone who had publicly supported the false accusations. Mr. Anderson called out Jessica Walsh, Pierce Aviation's chief legal counsel, who had arrived via emergency flight from the company's Denver headquarters. We'll be in touch regarding your public statements supporting false accusations against Mr. Pierce and our company. We take defamation very seriously. Kevin's face went ashen as he realized his legal career might be over. Pierce Aviation's legal department was legendary in the aerospace industry for their aggressive protection of company reputation. A defamation lawsuit from them could end his career and bankrupt his firm. Brenda Morrison, Stephanie's country club friend, was experiencing her own consequences. Dr. Morgan, the psychology professor, approached her with academic curiosity. Ms. Morrison, doctor. Morgan said, I'm documenting this incident for research into group psychology and mob behavior. Can you explain what evidence convinced you to support Ms. Caldwell's accusations? Brenda looked around desperately for support that was no longer there. We were just... Stephanie seemed so certain, and the timing did seem suspicious. So you supported serious criminal accusations against an innocent man based on your friend's certainty and suspicious timing. Dr. Morgan's questions were delivered without accusation, but their implications were devastating. I didn't know he was innocent, Brenda protested. Did you know he was guilty? Dr. Morgan replied. Because those are the only two options, and you chose to assume guilt without evidence. The social media reckoning was equally swift and merciless. Diego's live stream had been picked up by news outlets worldwide. Seat stealer Karen was trending globally. Someone had created a compilation video of Stephanie's escalating accusations, juxtaposed with evidence of Damon's professionalism and kindness throughout the ordeal. Luna Martinez, who had defended Damon from the beginning, found herself being interviewed by reporters who had arrived at the airport. What struck me most, she told a CNN correspondent, was how quickly people were willing to believe criminal accusations against a black man who had done nothing but demonstrate kindness and professionalism. Even when he gave up his seat to avoid conflict, they found ways to make him the villain. Robert Johnson, the elderly businessman, provided historical context that resonated with viewers across generations. I've seen this pattern my whole life, he told reporters. When black people succeed, when they achieve positions of authority and respect, there's always someone ready to tear them down based on suspicion and assumption rather than facts and evidence. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez was coordinating the actual resolution of the technical crisis. Pierce Aviation's emergency response team had arrived with the replacement Eagle Eye navigation module, and installation was proceeding ahead of schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced over the gate area intercom, thanks to the cooperation of Pierce Aviation Technologies and their CEO, Mr. Pierce, we will be ready for boarding in approximately 45 minutes. We apologize for the extended delay and appreciate everyone's patience during this unusual situation. The irony was lost on no one. The man who had been accused of sabotage was the same person who had resolved the crisis that grounded them all. Damon Pierce, meanwhile, was handling the situation with the same calm professionalism he had demonstrated throughout the morning's ordeal. When approached by reporters, his response was measured and thoughtful. What happened today wasn't about me personally, he said. It was about assumptions and prejudices that affect people who look like me every day. The difference is that most people don't have the resources or platform to defend themselves effectively. We need to be better than this as a society. When asked if he would pursue civil litigation against his accusers, Damon's response surprised everyone. I'm more interested in education than retribution. This incident provides a teachable moment about the dangers of assumption and the importance of evidence-based thinking. Pierce Aviation will be establishing a scholarship program for students studying conflict resolution and bias awareness. His response demonstrated the kind of leadership that had built a billion-dollar company and earned the respect of Pentagon officials. Even in the face of public humiliation, he was choosing to build rather than destroy. But not everyone would escape consequences so easily. Stephanie Caldwell was being processed by federal agents who had arrived to handle her arrest. Her business phone had been ringing continuously with cancellations as news of her behavior spread through Denver's business community. The meeting with Patricia Vanderbilt was not just missed, it was permanently canceled along with any hope of saving her failing real estate company. "This will ruin me," she sobbed to the federal agents. "Please, I just made a mistake. I was stressed about my business. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Ma'am," one of the agents replied, "making false accusations of terrorism against a federal defense contractor isn't a mistake. It's a crime. And it's our job to take that crime seriously." As Stephanie was led away in handcuffs, the passengers in the gate area watched in stunned silence. The woman who had started the morning demanding special treatment because of her status was ending it facing federal charges that could destroy her life. Diego captured the moment for his live stream, providing commentary that would be viewed millions of times over the coming days. "And that's how someone goes from stealing a seat to stealing their own future," he said solemnly. "This is what happens when prejudice meets accountability in the age of social media." The gates of justice had opened, and they would not close until everyone had received exactly what their actions had earned them. The morning's events had tested everyone's character, and the results were now clear for all the world to see. But the most important reckoning was still to come. What kind of society would emerge from the lessons of Flight 1425? Would it be one that learned from its mistakes, or one that repeated them with different players and different victims? The answer to that question would determine whether Damon Pierce's choice of mercy over vengeance would inspire lasting change, or would be forgotten as just another viral moment in America's ongoing struggle with race justice and the meaning of true equality. The installation of the new Eagle Eye navigation module proceeded with military precision, a testament to Pierce Aviation Technology's emergency response protocols and the expertise that had made them America's premier aerospace contractor. Within 45 minutes of Damon's authorization, the system was operational, and Flight 1425 was cleared for departure. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that would be remembered long after the flight landed in Washington, D.C. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready for boarding. Before we begin, I want to address this morning's extraordinary events. Our aircraft experienced a mechanical failure that delayed our departure for several hours. During that time, one of our passengers was subjected to false accusations and public humiliation based solely on prejudice and assumption. The gate area fell silent as 200 people prepared to hear their captain's judgment on the morning's events. That passenger, Mr. Damon Pierce, is the CEO of Pierce Aviation Technologies, the company that designed and manufactured the navigation system that was damaged. Not only did he endure false accusations with remarkable grace, but he personally authorized the emergency replacement that is allowing us to complete this flight today." The captain paused, letting the full irony sink in. "Mr. Pierce, on behalf of United Airlines and every passenger on this aircraft, I want to apologize for the treatment you received, and thank you for your professionalism in resolving our crisis. It is an honor to have you aboard." Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the gate area, led by Luna Martinez and Robert Johnson, and quickly spreading to include nearly every passenger. The ovation lasted for several minutes, with passengers standing and turning toward Damon, whose calm dignity throughout the ordeal had earned their respect and admiration. Diego captured the moment for his live stream, which had grown to over 150,000 concurrent viewers. "This is incredible," he whispered to his camera. "The man who was accused of sabotage just got a standing ovation from the same people who witnessed his public humiliation. The redemption is complete." As boarding began, the social dynamics had completely reversed from the morning's events. Passengers approached Damon with apologies, thanks, and requests to shake hands with someone who had demonstrated such remarkable character under pressure. Dr. Morgan, the psychology professor, used the boarding process to conduct impromptu interviews about the lessons learned from the morning's events. What I witnessed today, she told Diego's camera, was a perfect example of how prejudice and assumption can lead to the persecution of innocent people. But I also saw how courage evidence and moral leadership can eventually triumph over mob mentality. Luna Martinez, boarding just ahead of Damon, turned to address him directly. Mr. Pierce, I want you to know that your response to this situation has restored my faith in human decency. A lesser person would have used their power to destroy the people who wronged them. You chose education over revenge. Thank you, Damon replied quietly. But the real heroes today were the people like you who stood up for what was right without knowing who I was or what I could do for them. That's true character. Robert Johnson, despite his 73 years, waited to board until he could speak with Damon personally. Young man, he said, I've seen a lot in my lifetime, but I've rarely seen someone handle injustice with such dignity. Your parents raised you well. They did? Damon smiled, thinking of his mother, who had worked nights as a janitor to put him through college. They taught me that how you respond to unfairness says more about you than the unfairness itself. The flight itself was remarkably peaceful. Damon had been upgraded to first class in a window seat, ironically the same seat preference that had started the morning's chaos. But this time the gesture was one of respect and apology rather than entitlement and demand. During the flight, several passengers approached him to share their own stories of facing prejudice and assumption. A Hispanic businessman talked about being questioned about his credentials at corporate meetings. A black nurse shared experiences of patients assuming she was less qualified than her white colleagues. The difference today, the nurse observed, was that you had the power and platform to defend yourself. Most of us don't have that luxury. Damon listened thoughtfully to each story, recognizing that his wealth and status had protected him from consequences that others faced daily. The responsibility of that privilege weighed heavily on him. As the plane began its descent into Washington, D.C., Damon reviewed his notes for the Pentagon meeting that had originally brought him on this journey. The $15 billion defense contract that awaited his signature would be the largest in Pierce Aviation's history, but it no longer seemed like the most important thing that would happen during his visit to the Capitol. Captain Rodriguez made one final announcement as they prepared to land. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Reagan National Airport. Our arrival is actually ahead of schedule, despite this morning's delay, thanks to favorable winds and the cooperation of air traffic control. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for your patience during an extraordinary day. The irony was not lost on anyone. A flight that had been delayed by accusations of sabotage was landing ahead of schedule because of the accused saboteur's intervention. As passengers deplaned, many stopped to thank Damon personally. Some asked for business cards, others for selfies, a few for advice about starting their own companies. He graciously accommodated each request, recognizing that these human connections were more valuable than any corporate contract. Diego's final live stream update captured the end of an unprecedented day. Flight 1425 has landed safely in Washington, D.C., he reported to his audience, which had grown to include viewers from around the world. The man who was accused of sabotage this morning is heading to a Pentagon meeting that could create thousands of jobs and strengthen national security. Meanwhile, his accuser is facing federal charges and social media infamy that will follow her for years. The contrast was stark and sobering. One person's choice to remain dignified in the face of injustice had elevated everyone around them. Another person's choice to assume the worst about a stranger had destroyed her own life and reputation. As Damon Pierce walked through Reagan National Airport toward his Pentagon meeting, he carried with him not just the technical specifications for a revolutionary navigation system, but a story that would spark conversations about justice, prejudice, and redemption across America and beyond. The flight was over, but its impact was just beginning. 1 year later, Damon received a handwritten letter from Diego Morales, now studying aerospace engineering on a Pierce Aviation scholarship inspired by that flight. "You showed me that dignity and kindness are more powerful than anger and hate," Diego wrote. The Damon Pierce Foundation, established after the incident, had awarded 250 scholarships to underrepresented students pursuing STEM careers. Meanwhile, Stephanie Caldwell completed 500 hours of community service at Denver International Airport, assisting passengers with disabilities, a court-ordered assignment that gradually taught her the value of service over entitlement. The incident sparked revolutionary changes across the aviation industry. Every major airline implemented the Pierce Protocol for discrimination incidents, requiring immediate supervisor intervention and body camera documentation. Flight crew bias training became mandatory quarterly, using Luna's viral video as a case study. The phrase "seat-stealing Karen" entered popular culture, while Pierce-level grace became shorthand for maintaining dignity under attack. Robert Johnson, the family man who witnessed everything, became United's new director of passenger advocacy. When Forbes asked Damon about that day, his response became the story's enduring message. Respect isn't earned by wealth or position. It's owed to every person who walks onto that aircraft. The moment we judge someone by their appearance rather than their character, we've failed as human beings. True power isn't the ability to humiliate others. It's the choice to lift them up instead. The seat 2A on United Flight 1425 now carries a small plaque reading "Reserved for respect regardless of race status or background." Sometimes the most profound lessons happen 7 miles above the earth when there's nowhere to hide from who you truly are. If this story moved you, I want to ask you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Your like tells YouTube that stories about justice and redemption matter. Second, subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we share powerful stories like this every week. Stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the importance of standing up for what's right. And finally, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's someone who's faced discrimination themselves, or maybe it's someone who needs to understand how their assumptions can hurt innocent people. Either way, sharing this story helps create a world where respect isn't reserved for the privileged few, but guaranteed for everyone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, in a world where you can be anything, choose to be kind.